Now that we have set up the reactive form, it is time to add some validators to some of the properties and also update the HTML file, so whenever one of the validators is not met, then you get to see an error message. So for that, let us go to our project. In here we are going to start with the email address, and you can find that on the component.ts file. So in the email address, we're going to add an array of validators. So for that, I'll just type validators dot required, and then other than required, you can also define that the email address needs to be of the email format. So validators dot email, and this is all you need to do. In the phone number, to define a pattern, the same way you need to put the pattern inside an array. So validators dot pattern, so use the pattern method, and then inside the pattern method you need to define the pattern. Like for example, we want to have 0 to 9 numbers, 4 of them. Then we want to have a dash, and then after the dash I want to have other numbers 0 to 9, so 4 other numbers. On the array, the same way we can define the min and max values. For that, I'll just type in here validators dot min. The minimum value is going to be 0, and the maximum value, so validators dot max, is going to be 10. For the feedback, we can just define that this is going to be a required field. So inside an array, validators dot required, and let's do the same for feedback. Now let us go to the HTML file, and we're going to check if any of the validator conditions were met. So in the feedback.component.html, let us start with the email address. Here we want to create a div. This div is going to have a class text danger, and this div will show up only if certain conditions are met. Like for example, so I'll just type in here, for example, ng if, and then feedback form dot get, and then I'll try to get the email address. So I'll just put the ng if down here. So we have the email address and we know that it's dot invalid, and the feedback form dot get email address or feedback form dot submitted. So feedback form dot submitted. And then down here, we're going to check for the divs. So we're going to check both for the required and also the email pattern. In here, we have an error which says that the object is possibly null. And that's because on the feedback.component.ts, we have not defined it in here or in the constructor, but inside the ng on init. That's why in here you need to add the question mark. So this value gets checked only if we have a value in the feedback form dot get email address. Let's do the same for this one in here. So feedback form. Let me see. In here, let us also add the dirty check. So question mark dot dirty. Now here we get this error which says that the submitted does not exist on the type form group. And here you can either remove this one and just add a property to check if the form was submitted or not, or you can remove this completely, because what we're going to do is that we're just going to add a check on the submit button, which is going to be disabled if the form is not valid. So there will not actually be any submitted event because the button itself is going to be disabled. So let us scroll up in here. And this is just for the div. Now let us create another div. So div. Now here let's type, we want to show the first div, ng if, and then if the feedback form So the feedback form dot get email address that has an error, related to required. We want to show in here that email address is required. And in here, let us add the question mark. Otherwise, we want to check for the email validation. So if it has an error related to email, so we checked for required. Now let us check for the email. The address has an error about email. Email format is not valid, or you could just type in here invalid format. Let us copy this div section and just paste it down here for the phone number. And you can see that compared to the template driven forms, you don't have to define in here an input and then just try to read the input, but instead you can see that you are just reading from the phone number, which is the phone controller name. So let us change this one in here to phone number. So if it's invalid and it is dirty, so you type something and then you remove. And in here for the phone number, you can see that we have just the pattern validation. So for that, just check for the pattern. So if the phone number has the pattern error, then just type in here invalid pattern. Let's remove the other div. Let's copy this div. Let's copy this div and use it on the feedback title. On the feedback title, so feedback title. And here the error can only be required because in the validators we have set just the validators.required. So we're just going to check for errors related to required. Just type in here feedback title is required. Let's do the same for the feedback value itself. Just down here, it's going to be feedback, 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 and then feedback is required. Now on the button, I'll just add the disabled attribute. So we have class, we have type, then here disabled. And for the disabled, we're going to check if the feedback form is invalid. So if the feedback form is invalid, then we just want to have the submit feedback button to be disabled. Let us save the changes and go back to the app. So now in here on the console, you can see that we have some errors, and the error says that if you were to use the form group, then you need to define it this way. So by using the new form group instead of using the form group builder. So let us just go back to our code and update what we currently have. So in here in the component file, I'll replace the form builder with new form group. And then in here for each form group property, we're going to have a new form control property. And then inside the form control, we're going to define the default value and also the validation. Let us do the same for the phone number. Just copy this section, paste it in here, and then just place the closing square bracket. I'll do the same in here, and then down here and here as well. Let me add new form control. New form control, these are the validators. Let's add another one in here. And then one last one down here. Looks like we don't have any errors, but now the form builder is not being used. So what I'll do is that I'll just remove the form builder from the constructor. I'll just save the changes and go back to the app. Now here we can see that we don't have any errors, and also the submit feedback button is disabled. One last thing that we are missing in here is that on the rate experience, the default value is set to 8, but we cannot see the value down here. So let us just go back to the app one last time. So let us just go back to the code. Here on the HTML file, on the rate, I'm going to just add a div. And then inside the div, I'll just type your rate. Then inside curly brackets, so we have interpolation here. I'm going to use the feedback form, and then .get, I'll get the rate property. And then from the rate property, I'm going to get the value. And here you can see that we have an error because this object is possibly null. So just add a question mark. And this is all you need to do. Let me just go back to the app. Now here I'll just close the console. You can see that I have the value 8. Let me type an email address. And then in here, if I just remove the email address, you'll get the error email address is required. And if I just type ASD, invalid format. Then let's also add a phone number. You can change the rate experience in here. You can add a title and add feedback. Now, if I press F12 just to see the console and then click the submit feedback button, you'll see in here that now we have the feedback form values, and in here we have all the values that we provided on the form.